Hey gang, welcome to another CirdecSongs Chat. As always, I ask for you to like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, just so the algorithm will be happy and I can become popular when I grow up, which will be awesome. This is a first, ladies and gentlemen. I am interviewing a wonderful musician from a most interesting position. I am talking to drummer supreme Pat Mastelotto. He is well, I'll let him tell you where he where he is right now. Pat, how are you and what's going on there?
Uh, Doing fine. I'm at, what do we call it? Uh, Abbott Hospital in Minneapolis. We came to Minneapolis a couple days ago for a Stickman show, which was last night, and I was not there. I'm very sorry. I was here at the Abbott Hospital. Uh, do you want me to give you a little background on this thing
Oh,
here?
you talk about as much as you want to talk about. This is your life.
Okay. Well, during the last Crimson touring in 2021, we took a break right in the two legs of Crimson touring. So Tony and I do the camp up in the Catskills with Adrian Ballou, the
Right.
Three of a Perfect Pair camp. So we had already booked that. So when Crimson booked the tour, they knew we needed this break in the middle of the tour. And Tony and I took a red eye from the last show in Phoenix on the first leg and arrived up in New York at Newark and drove directly up to Woodstock to do the camp. And we did that for 5 days. And on the last day of the camp, as we traditionally do, we do a public show at the Bearsville Theater in Woodstock. We did that show and we finished and packed our gear up. And I went back to the hotel, the wonderful Super 8 in Kingston, and stepped outside to enjoy a few moments with Bill Munyon and Julie Slick. There was a few of us out there, and I started to feel a little sick. And I told Deborah, my wife was with me right there, luckily. And I said, I think I need to go inside. And as we were going back inside, I got a little dizzy. And next thing I know, I woke up with firemen standing over me, paramedic crew.
Oh
So I
goodness.
dropped. Yeah, I dropped. And I was trying to get them to put me back in my bed into my room, and they said, no, no, no. And they into the ambulance, which is a dizzy little ride, to the emergency room in Kingston, where they were kind of freaked out about my condition. And they put me on a helicopter to starflight me to the Westchester Heart Hospital. So I arrived there about 3 or 4 in the morning on Saturday morning. Of course, the big doctors aren't there, but I dealt with the nurses for a couple of days. I've had AFib for a long time. My mother had a stroke. My grandfather had a stroke. So I'm aware of the cardiologist my mother dealt with. And I went to him and said, well, I've been going to him since before any of this happened. So I was already on some meds. And he kind of stress tested me before we do a big King Crimson tour. I want to make sure I'm not going to crap out. Well, I did crap out on this one. Uh, so that ended up with them. We would have this last half of a week still to go, and I wanted to go home. They said, you can't go on a plane, and you're going to stay here under observation. I said, well, wait a minute. My back's killing me sitting in the hospital. Uh, can I get out of here? I'm going to play with King Crimson in about 5 days in Albany, and they've got a very posh, nice hotel up there. Can I recover up there? Which is what they let me do. And I played that first gig and I finished the tour. And when the tour finished, I did that tour with a chip. They put a monitor chip inside me. Uh, and then I did particularly the warm-up show. I come home to the hotel and there's a message from the hospital. It says, where were you at 9:45? And I'm looking at the set list and going 9:40. Oh, it's Court of the Crimson King. That's not a stressful song. Why would that be the day, made it through Drumzilla and the tough stuff. Anyway, I proceed on with a pacemaker for the last few years and an ablation a little bit later. Like before we went to Japan, I had the pacemaker put in that little gap. I think it was around October 21. So things have been going smooth the last few years. And this last week, about a week ago now, I started to get an infection. I started to get a rash in my chest near the pacemaker. And we live in Texas, so after a day as it kind of got a little worse, we thought it might be a spider bite. So I went in Monday, about 5 days ago Monday, in Austin. A wonderful doctor, Stacy, and And she said, no, this isn't a spider bite. This is an infection. She lanced it and drained it, but there was a lot more there. She put me on antibiotics. I forget what that one was called, but a pretty heavy one, oral. And I flew to Minneapolis, where I am now, on Tuesday. And we rehearsed over at Bill Eden's house, a wonderful guy that let us rehearse in his space there in his house. Tony, Marcus, and I, because we haven't played for, I don't know, since when, several months at least. Everything's looking good. And I've been taking pictures of my spider bite wound and sending them to Stacy, my doctor back in Austin. And she hit me up early in the morning on Thursday, yesterday, and said, no, these pictures do not look good. It's not receding. You need to get into emergency right away. So she located a hospital near the hotel where we were yesterday and would have been tonight. And I went to that hospital. It's a Memorial Hospital here in Minneapolis. They had some imaging tools so they could see if this infection has gotten into my pacemaker. They call it a pacemaker pocket. And that's what they're afraid of, because that's a quick trip to another place I don't want to go.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, so they moved me from there to the place where I am now, the Abbott Heart Hospital. It's a very sophisticated, upscale heart hospital. And they proceeded to do tests all night last night, and doctors coming in today. And the decision was made to go after the infection first. So that's what I've just been doing the last few hours this evening. I've been sedated. Let me think, it was around 4 or 5. It's about 9:30 here, so I've been out about an hour and a half now. I've just eaten some food that Deborah had. My wife, I'm lucky she's with us as the merch girl, but she's much more than that.
And now
she's my nurse.
She's the nurse girl, yeah.
Yeah, and she's great at it. So I just had a little salad, and I thought, Cedric's been trying to do this interview with me for, a year? More than a year.
Something like that, yeah.
I keep postponing. I said, fuck it, let's do it now. Let's call Cedric and say, let's go if you want to do it. So here I am.
This was not my tactic. This was not my plan.
Well, I'll just wrap up the story by saying I was not able to play last night. They would not let me out. I believe me, I asked a few times, can't I just go? I feel good. They're going, no. So at the last minute, Elvin Patrick, who's been traveling with us for a year or so with Stickman and Tuner and doing many things, because he's great at a lot of gigs, driving, but not drumming. I mean, he is a drummer. He's a very good drummer. And I knew he could do the gig, but he just didn't know the material. So he did the gig last night, and I haven't talked to him really about that since. I look forward to talking to him, figure out which songs they actually played and how they got through them, rearranged them, or whatever they could do, because he didn't have anything more than a few hours of sound check, if that, because he's got to load in, set up the merch booth, help with the PA with Fraza, and then be the drummer. So
no pressure at all.
Yeah, I'm reading the reviews. He did great. I've known Elvin since before he was born. His dad was one of my favorite guitar players in LA, Pete McRae. We were in several bands together. And so I was there around the time that Elvin was born. And he can tell you someday you should interview Elvin, but his dad loved Elvin Jones. So he's named after Elvin Jones. And there's some great pictures. Yeah. The great picture when Elvin used to play the Catalina Club in Hollywood and stuff like that. So Pete would be there so often, and with his baby Elvin. So there's pictures of big Elvin Jones with little baby Elvin. So anyway, Elvin's a very accomplished drummer, although I don't know if I can say accomplished. He's a very good drummer that people don't even know about. So he works a lot of gigs. He's gone to acting school and things like that. So he's very self-confident, and yeah, he did great. He did awesome. They call him EP. It's Elvin Patrick. So he's named after 2 drummers. Like I say, Pete being one of my best friends, he told me early on, he said, I think I want to name my boy Pat, Patrick. So they've got some Irish in their background, more Scottish, I guess, but McRae, I guess, is Irish. So
yeah, that's right.
His dad introduced me to Bushmill when we were younger men. Yes. So, So that brings you up to date on what's going on in the Stickman world. We'll continue with the tour. I don't know how soon I can actually flail my arms around. Uh, they did not take the pacemaker out. They needed to see if the infection had breached the pocket of the pacemaker. So there was some consideration today that they were going to take it out, but they decided let's get the infection out and try and find the cause of it. And if we're going to put in a new pacemaker, or take this one out, and then the conversation about where do you put the new one, this is all
Right,
other
right.
stuff for another day. So that's
Fair
probably
enough.
enough of that. Get into the musical questions you've been waiting a year to have me answer for you.
Well, on behalf of, I guess, everybody, yeah, and I know you're coming to Chicago soon. I'm looking forward to seeing you. As much as I'd love to hear you play again, don't rush. Okay, just let's go ahead and pace ourselves. And when all else fails, we'll watch Elvin play. You sit next to me, and we'll enjoy ourselves that way.
Well, I may sit off stage next to him and give him a little, 1-2 B sector or a Q. I don't know how I can help him, or else I may be out at the merch booth with Deborah.
That's a good
And
point.
yeah,
It's got to be difficult playing someone else's gear if you're not used to it. And I know you trigger a lot of electronics and what have you, so that must have been a challenge for our friend.
Yeah, well, part of that I could try to explain, and part of it he knows a little bit because he's been around my rig now for a year or two or three. But when it comes right down to it, even I forget. Is it the pad on the left? Is it the third pad or the fourth? There's 9 zones on that one pad, and sometimes I forget is the vocal there, is the bass line there? Anyway, there's a little bit of that Mickey Mouse kind of concentration game where you flip the cards
Right.
and you have to remember where were the matching figures or numbers. Uh, so I wouldn't have done a whole lot better. I'm curious to talk to Elvin and the guys and figure out which songs they played and didn't even bother to try to add those things. But
Right.
we do play a fair amount of the material with the click track, so he did have the information, the patch numbers, to try and be able to drive a click for the guys to be playing the songs as they're used to and have a more secure feeling with the tempos. And yeah.
Well, good. We'll muscle our way through. And speaking of which, drumming is athletic. There's no question about that. I'm an old tennis player, and I'm a quasi guitarist right now. But I'd like to think that drumming is a lot more stressful than being a guitarist. Do you do any specific exercises to get yourself ready for shows, tours, that kind of thing?
Well, in my favor, in terms of my heart condition, I've always been a guy who goes to the gym. I had to kind of give up on basketball and things like that for fear of jamming a finger and all that.
Right.
But I tend to go to the gym every day, whether we're on touring or at home. And my main focus, I've never lifted free weights or anything like that. My focus used to be a Stairmaster and then a seated bike, but recently my knees and back and things, that's not friendly to me, but a rowing machine. I love to row. So I usually just focus on stretching and then row. In fact, at the beginning of COVID, as soon as we got back from Japan, we were over there with Stickman. Right when COVID hit, we were the last band to play at the Nagoya Blue Note.
Right.
And then Marcus and Gary Husband was our guest at those shows. So I only got to play with Gary that one night. But Marcus and Gary stayed and made a wonderful record, music for our time. While Tony and Fraza and I said, let's catch the first plane before we can't get out of Japan. So I got right home, and the first thing I did was get on Amazon or wherever it was and buy a rower that I could keep in the house. So I still have that. Yes, I exercise quite a bit. The interesting thing I learned about my heart condition is it's basically AFib stuff, which has happened since I'm a kid, but I never knew what that purring was.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, what was I going to say there? That the AFib thing, they tachybrady, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I have to lighten up a little bit on the exercise, but they explained to me that my heart has really, really good plumbing. I've got a solid heart. It's the
Good.
electrical part of my heart, which is called the sinus node. which sets the tempo of your heartbeat. So this is a great drummer joke. Believe me, I got it from Gavin all the time. Oh, did they put a sync tone in there? Are you going to be better with your tempo now? Jeremy and the other guys were a little easier, but Gavin, he enjoys the joke. He can run with it. He's got a lot of funny things to throw back at me almost every day. So,
And I know you've heard it before, but I'm just going to throw the joke out there too. Is it beating in an odd meter? That's my question.
well, it shouldn't be. That's the problem. I
Yes, you got
mean,
to stay
maybe,
informed, man.
yeah, but the thing here, maybe it's doing some bars of 13 or dropping whatever it's doing there that's causing me my tachybrady issues. So, that's why I wear a pacemaker now. It keeps me up in the range closer to normal.
Right, right.
So,
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, you've had a pretty extended history as a drummer, studio musician, played with a lot of bands, constantly on the road like we are right now. What would you say has been your most athletic gig since we're going down this particular path?
ooh, most athletic. Well, it might be playing something like Drumzilla, at least at my age. I'm not particularly well. I'm pretty much self-taught, so I guess my fundamentals are not very good. So where some guys, most guys can play a lot faster and cleaner than me, I just sort of get in there and slug it out. I would feel that I'm more of Ringo or Keith Moon, and I'm just flailing and hoping the things land. When Ringo would say he would black out when he would do a
Right,
fill, and
right.
I remember that quote, and I thought, that's what I do. I go into that bar or whatever, that two beats, and then I come out on the other side and kind of look behind me and think, I'm not sure what I did. Unlike someone like Gavin, who's very prepared and meticulous about what he's going to play and everything. I kind of just throw my arms down and around and we get what we get. So sometimes I surprise myself in a good way and sometimes not so good.
I love the description when you first joined Crimson back in '94. I want to say when you were playing with Bill. I love the description of you two as Elvin Ringo, which which is very appropriate. And,
Yeah, we called it Elgo or Ringvin was how we referred to each other. We were never sure which one of us was Elgo, and which one of us was Ringvin, but I'm confusing it now. Sorry, it's the drugs. I'm still on drugs.
that's okay.
That's the other thing. I told Cedric, if you want to catch me right now, I'm drugged. I'll spill the beans on everything.
We'll go into a little excessive honesty real quick here, but I'll
Yeah,
try to.
but with Bill and I were different generational drummers in a way. He's only about 8 years older than me, but he grew up in the age of of uh, I'm trying to think here, but our jazzers, Max Roach, he loves Max Roach and Elvin
Right.
Jones and Joe Morello, and I'm just half a generation younger than him, but I grew up with Ringo and Charlie Watts and all the British invasion. That's what got me going. So
And
we have.
it's a nice contrast. I mean, I remember when I first picked up the Vroom EP way back when, and because the '80s band was my entryway into King Crimson, and I was just gobsmacked by them by the first time I heard it. So when I heard they were coming back in the '90s, and I see these two additional names, I'm like, who is Trey Gunn? Who is Pat Mastelotto?
Yeah,
And what are they
really.
doing there?
And
But
why are they even there? I hear you.
but it
You
seemed
had a wonderful four-piece.
yep, and now I can't imagine the band without you. So especially since you went off into some directions that Bill didn't. Within the context of Crimson, and I'll get to that in a little bit with the electronics and what have you. But because that was just something I absolutely love. I don't think the double duo has gotten enough praise over time because of the electronic elements and what have you. But I will circle back around to that. I like to ask musicians because I don't want to say I hate it. I dislike seeing the way other people journalists try to do it. How do we describe the Pat Mastelotto sound in terms of a drummer?
Well, man, I don't know. That's what's weird to me when some people say, "Oh, that sounds like Pat." I don't even know what they're talking, or I don't know. I know where to me, oh, that's a Terry Chambers thing I stole. Everything came from somewhere. Very little of it was my own, birth of my imagination. It was usually an interpretation of things that I enjoyed other people did. Uh, but what I think is confusing about my sound, is that I incorporated beatboxes and electronics. So I think a lot of times people don't know it, or they don't understand. To me, there's a differentiation, like an acoustic guitar, a banjo, electric guitar. A guitar player might bring all those instruments in, but he's a very different guy when he plays the banjo than when he plays the Stratocaster.
Right.
So I try to take advantage if I need sometimes what Andy Partridge called the donkey work. We give that to the drum machine. And if we need relentless consistency, I'll usually give that to the drum machine, and I play with it. But if you want something more reckless, a sloppy hi-hat, kind of who was Mickey Waller, is a drummer I loved. If you want that kind of Mickey Waller slopey feel, the machine can never do that. So my palette can be pretty wide. So a lot of these R&B things I did, Al Jarreau or whatever, pointed to, those were beatbox things. That was not me using sticks on the drums. That's why sometimes you see I differentiate traps and buttons versus playing. Yeah. Well, the traps would be a trap kit that I'm hitting with sticks, and the buttons would be the programming and the more electric stuff. But now so much of the electric stuff is actually played off pad because the technology has gotten so much better. But back in the late 70s, early 80s, that would have, when you're playing pads, trying to play as if you're playing an acoustic instrument, you're still, the little sounds. You couldn't really, but now you can get pretty believable. I mean, completely believable. In fact, as you know, the trick now is people putting samples back on their original drums. So by the time the drummer played the record, by the time they make the record, you're mostly hearing electronic drums that replaced his performance, but it is his performance. So if I have a sound, and if my sound is confusing, that's why.
I understand. It's a question of context, I would suppose, varying from artist to artist. I've followed you for a while.
Song to song sometimes. XTC Records is a very good example. I think there's 15, 16 tracks on there. There's 4 tracks on there that were played live on the floor without a click track. I think there's 4 songs on there that were played live but to a click track, and there's 4 songs on there like Mayor of Simpleton had a machine foot that I played on top of, but I played the pieces on top of it one at a time. So I just played the snare drum, and then I went out and just played the hi-hat, added the cymbal crashes. So there's a few songs like that, and then there's a few like Garden of Earthly Delights. The machine is playing the kick drum pattern incessantly, and I'm playing the entire top kit in one take, one performance altogether. So you can't isolate the sounds. That's the big feature of, and that's kind of what led me down the road, was working with Paul DeVilly when we did Welcome to the Real World. We had trouble getting our headphone mixes and all that crap going, so we laid down the drum machine stuff, which I programmed. So I programmed pretty close to exactly what I'm going to play. And then I went in and replaced the parts because Paul DeVilly had been working with Yes, and they had just done Loner of the Lonely Heart, which had great drum sounds. And Paul said, well, they did every piece separately. They did the snare drum alone. So I said, well, let's try that. So it gave us some huge sonic options. We could put the snare drum up on the conductor's podium out in the middle of the room. So I'm, with mics 10 feet away, and don't worry about any cymbal leakage. You've just got the snare drum. And in fact, when I did one of the first takes of a song, Paul said, do you want to do another take? And I said, no, that was pretty good. I want to keep it. And he said, no, we can keep that because it's just a mono snare track with the room and everything. In those days we put it all together because we only had 24 tracks to fill up. So, his idea was just like a vocalist will usually go out and sing 2 or 3 or 5 performances, and you make a comp. You say, oh, take 2 had your best second line, take 1 had the best first line. So we did that with my drum take. I got to do a second take and go in with just Paul and I in the control room and we picked my best parts of each. So it's like, wow, this is the coolest thing in the world. And it also kind of gives, as a drummer, it kind of gives you a safety net. You can go
Right.
off the rails and it doesn't crash the whole band. If we can get through the take.
Always a good thing. Always a good thing. And this is what I love about talking to musicians because I don't have to ask the question. They often go right where I was hoping they would go because I was going to ask you about the Mayor of Simpleton because I adore that song. I adore XTC, and I was so happy and surprised to see your name attached to it because, like I said, I didn't really know your name until the '90s, and it turns out you've been in my collection for a lot longer than I thought you had been. Uh, you did a lot of session work. Who would we be surprised to learn that you did session work with?
Oh, well, a pretty odd one was the Rolling Stones.
I didn't know that.
I forget that even happened. But somebody here at the hospital last year, and I thought, oh yeah, the Rolling Stones. But how is that possible? Well, I'll tell you how it's possible. Don was producing. It was before Voodoo Lounge. It was the record before that. I forget what it's called now. But there was a voicemail when I came home in those days on the answer machine, and it said, "This is so and so from Virgin Records. Don would like to know if he can get you at the record plant 10 a.m. tomorrow to work with the Stones." I go, "What? This is crazy. What are you talking about?" So Don explains. He said, "Here's the deal. It's a song called A Rock in a Hard Place, and the Stones version was not with a click, and it was cut around 140, 145 BPM, and we need a dance mix. We need to slow
Okay.
it down to 120. And what he essentially had me do was play four on the floor with a disco hi-hat and use me as the human clock, if you remember the way you would do that now. So, after I was done, they could use my four on the floor kick drum to trigger, Jeff Lorber was behind me. So Jeff Lorber came in and did the synthesizers and other electronic drums. He was just working with Paula Abdul right then. And I can tell you one quick anecdote or funny thing of that. So there's a lot of people in the control room with Dawn. It's a very different vibe. A lot of people in the control room. And, I'm out there playing and I got a pretty good take, but there was these things that go a rock and a hard place and a boom, boom. There's these little gaps and they're not
Right.
necessarily metronomically even. So I got to slush myself around to fit. And we did a couple punch-ins. We got most of the tape, but we're punching in one of those areas. And I saw Don stop the tape and he came on the talkback, said, "Hang on a minute, Pat." And I could see him on the phone. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, dear God, I failed. He's calling, see who can he get down here right now? And then I see him play the tape, the multi-track, and hold the phone up to the speakers. And I go, oh dear, he's playing it for JR or Jeff or somebody across. Can you help me get down here and fix this thing? And
Right.
anyway, the tape stops and he says, "Okay, let's get back to it." So I continue doing this punch. We get it a take or two later, a minute or two later. I go into control room. I said, Don, what happened there? What was going on? I said, "Oh, the Stones are playing Madison Square Garden tonight, and I played it for them over the speakers in their dressing room. So we got the thumbs up, you know." So, so
Nice.
that's an odd thing. And it's the sort of thing where I don't even, it's kind of like, did I dream that or did that really happen? Because it was never a record I could go find in the store. It was a 12-inch for clubs and stuff. But lo
Okay.
and behold, I was in Russia in a club and I heard it. And I go, holy shit, I know that's that track. That's me. And I tried to find the DJ. I get up to the DJ booth. I've got somebody who speaks Russian with me trying to explain, I want to see the record because I played on it. And they're going, you are liar and a liar. There's no way. Uh, so
and,
anyway,
and and lo and behold, there you were. I want to say that song was on Steel Wheels. Does that sound right?
yes.
Because
Yeah, that's the record.
because I do have that record, and now I have to go back and look at the credits again. I'm like, really? He was there too? Oh,
Well, you won't find me on the album version. You'll find
okay.
me
So
on this.
it's the
Yeah,
remix.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
got you. I got you. Well, we're going to take your word for it. Don't worry.
But I
I
still
believe you.
got to feel like I was playing with the Stones. I mean, it's very unique. Before the song starts, I get to hear Keith and Charlie and all the stage banner, and then their count off, a verbal count off, and off you go. So.
At what point does studio work just become a gig? I mean, it's one of those things where, the Rolling Stones want you to play on this or so and so wants you to play on that. At what point do you lose that, oh my God feeling, or does it even go away?
I don't think it ever goes away, man. Every day is a challenge. Every bar is a challenge. You know what I mean? Oh, you think, man, I got this in the bag. I can do this. And then you listen to the playback and go, I don't got this. I need to, it's not as good. Sometimes you think in your head while you're playing, it's better than it really is. And the tape doesn't lie when you listen to control and go, even if they go, oh, we love it, we're happy. And I go, I'm not so happy with that. I can probably run out and do a better one now that I've heard it.
When you said I don't got this, I suddenly just thought of the Mel Brooks movie High Anxiety. It's like I got it, I don't got it. I don't got
I think
this.
of the guys moving the piano. Is that in the same movie where they're
It,
moving a
it might
grand
be.
piano?
It might be. I have to go back and look again because that's a really funny image to me right now. I love asking this question too. In fact, first time I asked it was I asked Adrian at a Q and A, and he gave me a very curious answer, which I'll share with you if you like. When did you know you'd made the right decision to become a professional musician?
Ooh. Um, well, I guess when I had a legitimate hit record, like, I had some other stuff on the radio, but when Broken Wings got to number one,
Right, Mister.
maybe then, I'm always, and still insecure about my musicianship because I'm not, a lot of these cats go to Berkeley or they go to, different drums. I didn't go to a lot of drum school. I had a few lessons. I don't read I understand. I went to LA City College and there's a great teacher there, Dave Smith, who really helped me break the code. And I had a couple critical lessons with Joe Porcaro. Uh, and I understand the concept of the beats, but it's reading the rest, if that makes sense. It's more complicated to me than reading the notes.
That
When I
does make
see
sense.
16th note rest and you're playing, E's and U's, I have to stop and write the chart out with a simple left, right, uh, I play pretty much hand to hand, if you know what I mean, which means
Yeah, yeah.
generally the downbeats are on my right hand and the upbeats are on my left. So when I would play Baboom, I don't try to read the figure or count the seven or anything. I count down, down, up, down, up, down. That's it. That's the phrase. Right, right, left, right, left, right. If I stick with that pattern, then I've got the cycle and we're good.
Hey, we've all got our methods. It's any port in a storm, as they like to say. I've
Yeah.
always been fascinated by your kit because it changes. I talked to Simon Phillips and I watched some of his stuff, and his kit is pretty consistent. Regardless
Yeah.
of the gig. You like to switch things around. In fact, I had a screen. I made one of your photos a screensaver, and I can't find the picture anymore, and I'm very upset about that. Your back is to the camera, but it was during I want to say the double duo days when you had the acoustic and the electronics set up.
I might know the
It
picture you mean. It was taken in Nuremberg from behind me, and I had a shitload of pads on that kit, not just the
yes,
V drums, but these other Tektronix or Heart pads, so I could access not just the Roland V drums, but I was using the Nord D drum or Clavia D drum, whoever made that wave drum. I had a lot of stuff in the arsenal. Uh, it, I just felt like it needed that. It needed to go beyond just a strict what was available within the original V drum uh, uh, palette of sounds.
makes sense. Makes sense.
And
I
the V
just
drum didn't sample. So if I wanted my own samples, if I wanted to use, which I sometimes do, the snare drum from Kyrie, which has a lot of conk, like a pre-delay slap in it, then that would be in my sample, which would have been the D drum then, and I
right.
could detune it or change filters and disguise it. But anyway, those were all parts of that big kit you're describing. And the answer to your question is pretty much the music decides. It's not even the project or the artist or the album. It's song by song. This goes back to learning in the studio. If I'm going to record and really only play kick-cat snare, well, let's cover all the tom-toms up with a towel or even the cymbals, put a towel or get them out of the room so they don't resonate, and we can
Okay.
get a much punchier. It depends on the music, but generally that gives you a better drum sound with the least amount of microphones and phasing issues. There's some things on Mr. Cole record. Paul DeVilly and I really explored a lot of things. So there's a track on there, Crazy Boy. I'm in a pretty much a small closet in one of the studios, and we
Right.
just got a kick drum mic, which is actually facing away from the kick drum, not at the beater at all, away from the kick drum, and one overhead. So things like that. I love to do mono drum recording. Uh, yeah.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild. I see that screensaver in my head, my personal screensaver. I see that photo in my head, and I had it at work, and somebody came over, looked over my shoulder. He's like, "What the hell is going on there?" And I said, "That's just a lot of talent that's
Well,
being
it
used
gets
right
back
there."
to what I was saying. I just flail around, throw my arms out there, and hopefully they're going to hit a couple things in the right rhythmic pacing. And
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it struck me as interesting because I know Bill brought the Simmons pads into the equation in the '80s, but what you were doing was next level. And my first thought was, my God, what does Robert think about this? Bringing all that kind of gear into a King Crimson session. Was there any kind of pushback? Was there encouragement? What was going on there?
There was encouragement. That's very interesting, actually. Uh, we transitioned with the projects, where we're doing these improv gigs.
Yes.
Uh, and I forget the exact order. I think Project 4 might have been before 3, but the point I'll make is that uh, I was able to prepare a little bit at home and said, oh, at this tempo, I've got these loops and I've got these beatboxes I can synchronize. And if I'm going to have a slap aha on a drum, like say thrush, which became, they call it on the record, what was that called? The Power to Believe Part 2 or 3 or 4 or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Uh, for a while, I think it had the name, Trey used the Talker sampler and would use some quotes from, I forget now, but
You told
anyway,
me too, and I don't remember.
yeah. So I could prepare these things at home and then just because we're improvising, I just throw them at the guys on stage. So I was using what Fripp would call Pat's drum orchestra, these
Right.
extra arms. And so when we started Crimson again, Robert was very specific. He said, come fully kitted.
I remember you telling me that before. That's funny.
Yeah. And I'm not sure I understood him correctly, but to me, he meant bring all that crap and do that same. And in fact, I was a little reluctant when we did that first record without Bill, Constructional Lights.
Right.
Uh, yes, I was fully titted, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate in King Crimson to have that much drum machine and looping. It felt great in the projects, but it felt like Crimson needed to be more, you know, uh, in respect to Bill and Michael Giles, it needed to be more of a performance of a guy. So even though I was playing electronic stuff, I think almost every note on that record is played real time by me,
Right.
even though they're sample sounds. However, at the same time, we were doing jams all the time where I would use these other things, and that became Project X. That's some of the
Yes.
stuff that sort of just to separate itself out. And we were kind of working simultaneously, Bill Munyon and I, plus Bill shared the apartment that Trey and I had. So he would go home with us each night. So we continued to work on that kind of on the side. And that's where more of the beatboxy, kind of stuff went. And at the time, I was very influenced by David Holmes or Calvin Singh or Square Pusher. Just so many electronic cool things happening then. It seemed to me at the time like progressive rock was really IDM dance music. Somewhat like where Radiohead or somebody went.
Right. Right. Right.
That is in general rock, but progressive. Progressive rock is like stagnant. It's like 1971 Sound Like Yes, that's
It's
progressive.
it's the
No,
ultimate
but
irony.
okay, it's prog, I get it. It's a label, but
And
Yeah.
I loved it. I've told people 1,000 times that's probably one of my favorite Crimson moments is Project X. And I've said to you before, I want more of that because I call it 22nd century King Crimson, and I wanted more
Well,
of that.
we're giving it to you with Tuner. TE-NER, the thing
Yes.
Marcus and Trey started doing about a year or so ago. We knew Tony would be busy with Peter Gabriel. So I said to Marcus, what if we get Trey and we can fill in the off time and do some things? And we based those records. They came to my place and it was all improvised. We did develop songs. If you come see us play, I wanted us to have not just be a noodling improv thing. So we learned Construction of Light, Larks 4, Level 5, plus a tune of Trey's back catalog. And we do Absinthe, the thing Trey and I did on our 2 record. We do a couple of Marcus's pieces. So we have at least a good hour of real structured material arranged. And then we can do another third of the show as improv, as connective tissue, if you will, you know. So it satisfies my listening, my perspective. It seems like a good balance that way, but we're very project, you know, KC vibe with Trey and the shit those guitar players, Trey and Marcus, are doing. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just wish I'd shut up and just play a shaker and listen to those 2 guys.
And it's just amazing stuff. If you folks out there have not listened to this stuff, you owe it to yourself. And it's not every day that I get to say, hey, that accordion player rocks. And that was
Well,
such a
that
cool.
you're talking about K2 now, which is
Yes,
Trey
that's
and I.
K2. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Trey and I, we just finished The Power to Believe, and Trey and I had these little ideas we developed, which really, the writing in Crimson is kind of, you know, significant writers, Robert and Adrian. So that's the majority of the focus when we get to prepare the material. So these other ideas, a lot of them set on the side. So as soon as we finished, Trey was sharing a loft up in Seattle with Matt Chamberlain. And he
Uh-huh.
said, come on up. You can use Matt's drums. And so, oh, that's great. That'll be fun. So we went up there and sort of improvised and flushed out some of these ideas and made that record. And then we started to think, what are we going to call it? And could we ever tour? And I suggested to Trey, we call it TU, spelled T-U, plus 2. And rather than be locked into any 2 people, we could travel the world, we hoped,
Right.
doing shows with various duos. And the first thing I thought of was Kimo and Samuli, who were Cluster, the Finlandish duo.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's Kimo Pahoen is the most rockin' accordion player you'll ever hear or see. Uh, that was one of my first dates with Deborah, actually our first date alone, because we both had kids. So when we started to date, we were usually double dating with the kids. And I think she tells me it was our 5th date. I called and said, you want to go to Europe? And, 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 and I was serious. You know, she thought I was joking. I said, yeah, because I'm going to have 5 days to do a festival in Germany, and we can get a room and be alone. And
Nice.
yeah,
I think
but
you're
what
just
I was
showing
trying,
off saying you want to go to Europe.
no,
Sounds
no,
to
no,
me.
not exactly. But what I was trying to say is when the first time she ever saw Kimo play, and I thought well, one person described it as he's walking around carrying a TV, but I think she said, I've never seen a man fuck an accordion on stage. Kimo goes frickin' nuts, you know.
He does.
So he's quite a show.
It was fun. It's fun to listen to, and I still break it out every now and then. Just I get the urge to pick up my own guitar and see if I can wedge my way in there somewhere. And you've also done a little remixing here when you reconstructed the construction of light. It was out of necessity, but it was a fascinating take when you reintroduced the acoustic drums into construction of light because I'm pretty sure it was all V drumming the first time, correct?
Yeah, actually, Robert was pretty insistent on that when we did that record. He was so enamored with the V drums. He'd already done Project 2 with Adrian, and we'd done our projects 3 and 4. And he was just, he loved the fact that the sounds were right in your face. You know, you're not hearing them across the stage off an acoustic drum kit. So he wanted all electronic drumming on that record. And in fact, when we toured, that's why I had so many pads to try and cover all the bases with an electronic drum kit. And I was never as convinced as Robert was about the sound of that record. Uh, I introduced a few real acoustic drum elements, that I kind of snuck in the records. I can't remember. Oh, Frying Pan. I think
Okay,
there's a
yeah,
small loop of a real drum take I did out in the garage with Bill. A couple things like that. But it's almost 90%, 95% all electronic drum sounds. But I always felt like it was just not visceral. You know, if I could have had a real drum, I could have made it more dynamic and ballsy. And so that always sat in the back of my mind. And then when they started to do, I don't know, they started to remix some of the records in the catalog and stuff. And I
yeah,
mentioned, if you're ever going to remix, Constructional Light, uh, let me know. I'd like to have another go. And I think Singleton or Robert told me it's unmixable. We pulled up the multi-tracks and it's not salvageable. We can't remix this. And, and I said, send me the tapes. Send me the tapes. Let me have a go at this. And then I realized they didn't actually have all the right tapes. I said, well, no wonder. Because in those days, on that record, we were working on the blackface ADATs, the early Alesis ADATs.
right,
Uh, so you would only get 8 tracks on one VHS tape. So you'd have 2 or 3 or 4 of those running in sync to have 8 tracks for the drums, but maybe 4 of the drum tracks are on the 9, 10, 11 on the next VHS tape. And then the
right,
guitar, yeah. So before that record, Construction Light, was mixed, Ken Latchney, Adrian's engineer, God bless him, did the mixing, and Bill and I and Ken, we compiled, all the master performances onto I believe it was a Mitsubishi 48 track digital. So we didn't
hmm,
have to wait for all these slaves to sync up and all that stuff. So that's when I realized, David, you don't really have all the right multi-tracks. There's some things that got edited or played that you don't have in here, in the tapes you sent me. Uh, but already my intention was to play acoustic drums. So this was a great opportunity. And I got to sort of put it on the back shelf. So I'd work on it when I was home, and then we'd be on tour, and I'd come back and work on it and leave and come back and work on it. So I think putting the drums together on that and some of the remixing, was spread out over 6 months or a year, maybe, between touring. And then we did some mixing. David and Robert were really satisfied with those mixing. And Don Gunn, I think, he's a friend of, Bill Rieflin's. I think Don also did the Mexico City 8-piece Crimson, live in Mexico. So Don Gunn's fantastic, did really great mixing. I think he's a drummer, and he really kind of understood. It's difficult to get guys, a lot of engineers or guitar players or whatever, to try and get acoustic drums and electric drums to share the weight, share the muscle, you
right.
know. So sometimes they feature one over the other. That's the thing I loved about Machine. When I first heard some of Machine's other work, right away I spotted, this cat knows how to mix acoustic and electric drum elements and use both for their best advantage. And so that's why I suggested for, the Power to Believe record, uh, Robert and, Adrian. They knew that I wasn't totally happy with the sound of the Constructional Light, so they actually said, to me and Trey, they said, "Why don't you guys pick the engineer in the studio this time?" We did Constructional Light in Adrian's house, and
Yes.
it's beautiful, beautiful house, great everything, but very low ceiling to play. That's another reason we used all electronic drums. It's not. It's an okay drum room. It's a sound. Drums sound great on an Op Two Wah Adrian solo record. I love those
Uh,
drum sounds. But the material, it's a little tighter. And, anyway,
I was going to
yeah,
ask, uh, athletes like to talk about, players, coaches, and what have you. How many drummers, producers would you say you work with, and are you willing to rattle off a couple of names here and there?
drummer producers.
A producer who really understands drummers, who really likes the
Oh,
idea of getting the perfect drum sound and favors that above other things from time to time.
well, actually, you find a lot of engineers, and even live and all that, they start with the kick drum and they build. So they're very proud, and uh, very comprehensive in their their search for the great drum sound. So I don't think there's a shortage of guys like that. Dave Bottrell, we did. He's great. He's great. But for me, Paul de Villiers stands out. He's outstanding. He's a South African dude. And I don't know if it's because he's South African or what, but he really understood rhythms and he understands kind of a rubbery, if I could say, a rubber sound.
I'll take that.
I wouldn't say it's warmer or duller, but it's not as bright and pokey. It's smoother, but it's not dull. Paul was a huge fan of Genesis and Queen. So I think you can really hear that on the hit record for Mr. Mister. The Real World record was a big departure than the sound that Pages had. Pages had Vinny on drum on this record, much tighter, drier, sound. And I tend to think I sound personally better and I enjoy the music of a little bit more of a barking drum sound.
Okay.
This goes back to my love of guys like Mickey Waller and stuff that it's sloshing hi-hat and a little bit more room than you might think was necessary. I like that. So,
See, I love talking to drummers about this kind of thing because
yeah.
when I think of snare drums, I mean, I love Bill's sound and Stuart Copeland and Steve Jordan, and it sounds like that. Who are some of your favorite?
Well,
What are
those are
some of
all
your
really
favorite snare
great.
drums? I should say.
Sure, sure. Those are three great ones, but you're talking about three fairly highly tuned drums.
Yes.
And for some
Yes.
songs, that's great. And I tell you, as a drummer to play, it's really fun because the snare responds, it's high tuned. But, I think a lot of times when I listen to the music, a lower tuned, sloppier head, it's not as much fun to play, but, uh, like Jerry Marotta. I think
Yes.
Suzanne Vega 99.5 or whatever that record, that's incredible drum sound. He and Mitchell Froome and Chad Blake. Chad Blake, fantastic. In fact, when Robert and Adrian said, Pat, you can pick the engineer for the next record, the record that became Part of Bleed, the first guy I called was Chad Blake. I tracked him down, I called Chad and had a really long talk and he was not available. I really tried to twist his arm and convince him. He had a baby coming. He had a commitment to do a Gabriel record. We were going to have to wait a year or more. And so it just wasn't going to work. And that's when I started looking for other people and heard about Machine. And I think Machine's another guy that's a great drum sound. There's lots of guys that I haven't worked with that I love their sounds. Brendan O'Brien, or I can't think. There's a long list. I would love to work with you, Padgham, someday. It almost happened a couple times, but
I was going to ask about the gated drum sound and what you thought about that when it came to
oh, I
be.
love it. I love it. I love it. I mean, as much as In the Air Tonight, or is that what? Yeah, In the Air Tonight gets the stamp of being the one. I think it's The Intruder, the opening track
Yes.
on
Yes. The
Gabriel's
Pure
record, and that
Gabriel.
entire record. Those are fucking great sounding drums, and uh, the sort of symbolist approach. Again, doing stuff in pieces. Yeah, I think that. So Chad Blake and I believe the Intruder stuff. Who recorded? Who engineered most of that record? I'm not. It wasn't
I am not
Chad.
sure on that one.
I'm not sure it was Bottrell. I have to look again to remember who engineered on
Yeah,
the
I'm gonna have
record.
to go look because I'm that nerd who does love to read the liner notes and and
Yeah,
see who does what because you start to recognize sounds. I was going to mention Jeff Lynne, who brings a distinct snare sound with him. I don't know if it's kind of
yeah.
a Ringo influence, but I call it Plomph. it's
Yeah,
just
well,
what.
I was going to mention Jim Keltner. He's another for me.
Yes,
I love his approach to sounds and his playing as well. Growing up, I realized by the time I was maybe 16, 18 or whatever, I didn't quite know the names, but this guy, Jim Keltner, Jim Gordon, and James Gadsden, these three cats, every time I pick up a record that they're on, the sound and the feel is fantastic. So I realize it's the three Jims. Uh, those are the guys that sort of taught me how to look at making a record. And Ringo.
what? Yes, indeed. When I'm thinking about kick drums now, Brad Wilk from Rage Against the Machine. when they did a tune called No Shelter. It's on the Godzilla soundtrack, which is about the only use of that whole entire movie, but that's not important right now. He has a kick drum sound that is beyond belief. I mean, it goes through you. It hits you in the chest and then it keeps going. What do you feel is your secret to a good kick drum sound?
Oh, well, first off, I don't own any Rage Machine Against the Machine records, so I don't exactly know their studio sound, but I did see them live a couple times while Crimson was on tour. I caught them at the Roseland or whatever it was called there in New York City, and another couple gigs. And on those gigs, Brad was turned backwards, I think. But yeah, fucking dude plays great, very solid, wonderful drumming. So as far as the kick drum sound I like. I don't think there is one sound for every record or every song or anything like that. In general, my approach, especially live, is dare I say, I kind of look for a Lindrum sound. The
I
shortest,
remember that. Yep.
dry. I want a thump. I don't want a boom. I don't want a clap or a clack of a spank. I want a good
Yeah.
thud that is very short in duration because in the house, it's going to be a bigger note than you realize. So I'll put a pillow in there and pack that fucker down on stage. But when we get in the studio, I take that out or back it off a little bit or put a resonating head on the front or another drum in front that I can mic. And there's more control in that environment. You don't have to worry getting, you're on stage live and you get this boom, boom.
Right.
I can't spend half the sound check trying to figure that out. Let's just get rid of it. Let's just put a pillow in there. As Fraza said, one time we had a rental kit with, no hole in the kick drum head and the promoter, whoever was renting the drums, didn't want me to cut a hole in it. And I said, Fraza, we're going to go with a full head tonight. And he looked at me and he said, it's a fucking rock band. Put a fucking hole in it. Yeah.
So man knows what he wants. It's a good
Yeah.
philosophy.
Put a mic in there so you can get it the sound you want out in the house. Yeah.
How long do you spend in the studio setting up your sound? How long does it take I know it varies from gig to gig, but how long does it take
Well,
typically to dial in your sound?
sure. Well, I record at home. Most of the stuff you hear me do for the last whatever 20 years has been recorded in my house or my
Ah,
garage, upstairs, downstairs. I've moved in different locations around the house, but so that means the drums and the microphones are usually staying in place. So I may come back from a tour and jump right out there to try and record something and then find out, oh, I lost channel 4 or a cable. I forget. I did something. I took one mic away. So usually that's my phone a friend and I call Bill Munyon. Bill Munyon's another great guy with drum sounds, I think. We've done so many things together that, he reads my mind. He knows I like that Mitchell Froome, if you will call it that, uh, kind of vibe, uh,
right.
Chad Blake kind of thing. And,
And of
so
course, BPM and M popped right into my head as soon as you you mentioned that because that has a ton of
yeah,
cool sounds on it.
yeah. That's a very fun record to make. So, anyway, the sounds can come quickly, but are they the right sounds? So now I'm up and running, but maybe it's an ORK record now I'm working on. And when I left, I was working on, I don't know, Abra Moore. So it's a completely different band. So in context, it's got to change. So I don't usually move the mics around. I'll change the drum. Uh, I go back to the source, like just change the snare drum, change the packing, change the tom toms, maybe use a different tom or drastically change the tuning, stuff like that. Uh, or not play the tom toms and do them as an overdub, things like that. I can be pretty fast. But then when we get done and we listen, do we like it? Do we want to spend more time and go someplace else?
Gotcha. Makes sense. I'm hearing all these sounds in my head and cymbals. Where do you stand on cymbals? Like I said, I'm that geek who likes to listen to distinct sounds. Lenny White has some of my favorite cymbal sounds. It's really splashy when he when he plays. There's a one off called the Manhattan Project. It's Lenny and Stanley Clark and Wayne Shorter and Michelle Petrucciani, and his cymbal sound is just it's elegant. That's the best way I can put it. But
Well, that's Lenny. I mean, it starts at the stick. It really starts at the stick and the touch the guy has. Same with the guitar players. You can give Jeff Beck guitar to somebody else. It's not going to sound like Jeff Beck. It's
this is
it's in
true.
his fingers. It's in his touch. And so yeah, Lenny White. So many people have beautiful cymbal sounds. Uh, I play Paiste. I stick with that as much as I can, but I've got a big collection of stuff now. So I kind of in the back of my head, I know, oh yeah, I've got that old Rude, or I've got that old 602, or let's go for the 12-inch hi-hats, or, uh, we can get pretty picky and it's right there in my house. So I just turn around or go downstairs and find the ones I'm remembering from my past life that I think could be the appropriate one, a stack of broken cymbals or China cymbals or something. So it's very much song specific. With ORK, those guys love just smashing the hell out of a China cymbal. So
Right.
I'll put up 3 different sized China cymbals with a ride and 1 crash so they can get a lot of that, aggressive attitude in the music. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And I quote unquote picked on you a little bit about the kid I loved. Oh, are people trying to sneak in on us? Are we? Uh, I
Um,
picked on you about the kit that I use as my screensaver, but you also played with Terry Bozzio, who does not have a small drum kit. So
yeah.
how do you fit yourself in when you're playing with him? What was your philosophy towards that?
Well, my philosophy there is a lot like it was with Bruford, that I love what Terry or Bill does. Don't get in the way. Let them do their Terry Bill thing and find a way to fit around that. Uh, it's not like I'm going to try to control the vibe. No, no, no. I want to just be where it's needed and get away when it's not. I think it's a Hal Blaine quote that you can teach a drummer a lot of things, but you can't always teach him not to play.
That can be
So
difficult sometimes.
it is very difficult because we drummers want to play, we want to tap and do all that. So it's a lesson I learned a lot with Robert and David Sylvian and different people, and just getting older. And I don't know, I want to say being confident, but being secure enough to just let there be more space. I realized early on the space I fill is the space that Tony Levin can't fill. So I would sooner make a whole note rather than play a fill, and chances are Tony or somebody else is going to fill that with something beautiful.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And you need to rest, so we're going to wind this down a little bit. But I just keep coming up
Cool,
to
baby.
question after question. But because I'm thinking about how you on Dangerous Curves on the level 5 EP, you were sampling on the fly there, which was really fun to me.
Yeah.
Now where does that thought process come from? Because King Crimson and sampling don't necessarily run hand in hand in some people's heads.
Right. In fact, very contrary to some of the fans, they were not too pleased with that approach.
Well,
But
they
they
should know
grow to
better because it was
like it.
awesome.
They grow to
Yeah.
like it. But your first impression is like, no, no, no. Uh, oh, we developed that song more on the road, which is a great thing with Robert. That in general, he likes we do work on composition. We go out and play the material. We change it. It needs to be faster, slower, shorter, longer, and do all that by playing the material live in front of people. And then we go record it, and we know it, and we can record quickly. And that's how we did The Power to Believe. That's how we did the Thrack record. The exception to the whole Crimson catalog, the exception is the power or the Construction of Light. That is a record where songs were written in the studio as they were being recorded, because we were just jammed against a wall to finish the record. We maybe started in October and knew it had to be done by Christmas because there was a tour in February or whatever it was. So
Right.
we didn't get a chance to play the material live, except for some of it came out of the projects, but the projects didn't bear the name King Crimson, so you could be looser with it. Like I say, by the time it had a King Crimson name on it, I felt uh, an aesthetic uh, uh, to be played, that the drummer plays the parts, that he doesn't program the parts.
Makes
for
sense.
for
Makes sense.
for King Crimson. Yeah,
Yeah.
I blew that off by the time we did The Power to Believe. It was like, forget about it. My attitude has always kind of been the ends justify the means. So if I have to tear the drum track apart and do it in pieces and get it sound good and get it on the radio, no problem. If I can play it on the floor all by myself with one hand, like maybe a Rembrandt song, it's a simpler music, and then I'll do it that way. So
Makes sense. Makes sense. The first time we ever communicated, and I was so thrilled that you actually answered my email. I was complimenting you on putting the acoustic sound back in to Crimson when you were building towards the Power to Believe, and I specifically mentioned Dangerous Curves, and I just said that's one of the nastiest 6/4 riffs I've ever heard in my life, and it was just the four on the floor and everything else that was going on around that. Was that something that you worked your way up to, or did you just feel it in the moment? How did that work for you?
well, I can't exactly recall. I knew we wanted this da da da, so I wanted a four on the floor pulse, and I said, well, we'll let the machine handle that, and then I can be more free to play on top of it. So that is a machine kick drum part, with me at times improvising or trying different things. And then I go, oh, that's a cool phrase, machine. Let's grab those 8 bars, those 2 bars, whatever it was. I can't remember. And we'll use that 4 times in a row for this moment or whatever it was. Yeah, that was a fun track. There was some found sound I went over to Reddish Coach House where DGM used to be, Broad Chalk, and,
Hmm.
which is one of the villages there, and walk around getting nature sounds onto my DAT, getting the church sounds, getting the butcher. There was a butcher shop. They had me stay across the street from Reddish Coach House, which was above a small market with a butcher. So I'd be woken up every morning by this guy, chopping downstairs. And so I recorded a lot of these things, the squeaky door and the hinge that lead you into David Singleton's office. A lot of those things are in Dangerous Curves. There's literally a car going down the main, I don't know if it's called High Street or whatever, in Broad Chalk in the rain. All those things were on little samplers. Then I collect them all into one sampler and mix them or put them in different places, on that particular song and others.
So incredibly cool. You need to rest, so I'm going to get you out of here on this.
Cool.
Health permitting, and sounds like we're heading in the right way. What's coming up in the future for you?
Well, I'm building a big ass studio at home. I broke ground, poured concrete a little over about exactly a year ago. It's my retirement folly. I don't know.
Ah.
It's certainly my retirement, savings. We dumped it all into this idea, because I guess Deborah and I could see it coming for a while that there's going to be less touring, more at home, and recording in the house is great, but I can't have a lot of people over, and it's loud for who's ever downstairs in the house. So I built it out in the back of my property. I was trying to build it I bought another piece of property in Austin, which is for sale if anybody wants it. Uh,
We'll check
5
the listing.
acres, beautiful with no neighbors. So I was going to try to build there, but I ended up building it in my backyard, and it's big. Well, by my standards, it's very big. So I'll be spending a lot more time there, and I hope to invite different combinations of people. Uh, that's why, there's no budget really anymore. So if I can have a recording facility where I could actually invite 3 or 4 people and they have enough room to feel comfortable and we play live or overdub or improvise or whatever we do. So that's in my future. There's some gigs coming up with ORK, but I can't do them all. I've got these constant conflicts. And the other problem is I'm in America and they're in Europe. So they get a gig, even a well-paying gig for ORK, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. Well, half that money goes to my flight. So
Right.
it's just not practical. I've been saying for a while, and the guys have been saying for a while. So they're kind of doing some of these gigs, upcoming gigs with a different drummer. I haven't met him. They did some of the gigs last year with a different drummer, one-off gigs and things like that. But we have a new ORK record that, is about 70% done, going to the mixing stage. I think the first song will drop in September, and then it'll be
Awesome.
like every other month. The record will come in around March. Somebody came out of my past a few months ago, Jude Cole. I don't know if you remember Jude Cole.
Sure, sure.
I did 2 or 3 records with him in the 80s. We had a hit or two, Maybe It's Tonight and Feel Like Letting Go. So anyway, somehow Jude came back into my life, I don't know, 6 months ago. And, I did some recording with Jude, and then I wasn't sure whatever happened. And just maybe 2 or 3 days ago, he sent me one track. It's only one track right now. It was a leftover song from Start the Car, but I redid all the drumming, and it sounds really good. I think Chris Lord-Alge mixed it, and it sounds like the radio to me. So I think we're just days or weeks away from him revealing that to the public. I've got several new recording projects, some artists that have come to me. I can't think of all the guys' names, but I'm taking on their project. Something with the California Guitar Trio. They just going to do another track or a track for them.
Good.
So there's a lot of recording to do at home. Marco Macara. I love Marco. We just did some gig in Italy about 3 weeks ago that Deborah came with me, and we actually it's a bit elaborate, but Marco is now managed by Paulo, who was the booking agent for the Sylvia and Fripp tour. So when, maybe a year ago, we played in Rome with Marco opening, and I ran into Paulo. So Paulo then put me back into the package with Marco, and we played in a 2,000-year-old Roman amphitheater up in Tuscany, just a one-off gig with Marco. And then in the meantime, he said, we also do this ongoing thing that they take people that are in prison in Italy and have them write poetry and have Italian musicians put music to it. And he's done a couple of these. Yeah. And uplifting for these people, that are in prison or possibly getting out. So they've done that, and he encouraged me, asked me if I'd do a remix or to contribute, which I did. And in the process of remixing it, I had Deborah re-sang it. And so then he invited us to come to this same festival. So Deborah and I did our first gig along with Marco and his band. After we finished his tunes, we played the tune Deborah and I did, Sablegato. It's all in Italian. Deborah's is learning Italian and is very involved in Italian, so she sang it in Italian. And I can't think right now. I'm a little drugged, but
you have to say you have an excuse. It's okay. It's okay. Well, we look forward to hearing any and everything that you have to offer us. But first things first, get some rest, get healthy.
Yeah.
We want to see you out there. I'm hoping we can do a part 2 one of these days, because I have a bazillion questions I'd love to ask you. But thank you for. Yeah, let's not have another health crisis to make it happen, please. Let's stay up. Let's stay upright. Thank you so much, Pat, for your time, and
you're welcome.
We will see you. We'll see you out there soon.
Okay, dude. Thank you. Bye-bye.